In 1994, a Kurdish shepherd noticed something unusual about a hill in southeastern Turkey. The stones breaking through the soil were too regular, too symmetrical to be natural. When archaeologists arrived and began excavating, they found carved limestone pillars arranged in precise circles, decorated with detailed animal reliefs, buried under deliberately deposited fill. The site was dated to approximately 9600 BC, making it roughly 12,000 years old. That single date destroyed a foundational assumption of modern archaeology, that complex organised construction requires agriculture, settled communities and social hierarchy. Göbekli Tepe predates the earliest evidence of agriculture by at least 1,000 years. The people who built it were hunter-gatherers. And yet, they produced something requiring coordinated labour on a massive scale, sophisticated stoneworking technique and organisational capability that settled civilizations were not supposed to develop for another several millennia. Based on excavation records and peer-reviewed analysis, this is the story of the site that forced historians to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the origins of human civilization. The hill, now known as Göbekli Tepe, meaning roughly Potbelly Hill in Turkish, sits on a limestone ridge in southeastern Turkey, approximately 15 kilometers northeast of the modern city of Şanlıurfa. It is not a natural hill. It is an artificial mound built up by the accumulation of debris from human activity and the deliberate infilling that buried successive phases of construction. From a distance, it looks unremarkable. Up close, the carved stone surfaces protruding from the soil are immediately recognizable as something made rather than grown. The site had been noted by a survey in 1963, but was recorded at the time as a medieval cemetery and not investigated further. The flat limestone slabs visible at the surface were interpreted as tombstones. It was not until German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt visited in 1994 and recognized the stones as something far older that systematic excavation began. Schmidt would lead excavations until his death in 2014. Radiocarbon dating placed the site's origins at approximately 9600 BC. The pre-pottery, Neolithic A phase, which predates ceramic technology and permanent agricultural settlements. The date was tested repeatedly using samples from multiple contexts and confirmed by independent laboratories. It is not disputed in scholarly literature. The implication is stark. Göbekli Tepe is older than the oldest known agricultural settlements by at least 1,000 years. It predates the domestication of wheat, which occurred in this same region, by a significant margin. The people who built it were, by every archaeological measure, hunter-gatherers, without permanent homes, without stored food surpluses, and without the settled social organisation that had previously been assumed a prerequisite for monumental construction. The T-shaped limestone pillars that define Göbekli Tepe's enclosures range in height from 3 to 6 metres and in weight from 10 to 20 tonnes each. They were quarried from the surrounding plateau using stone and flint tools, transported to the hilltop and set upright in carefully prepared stone-lined sockets. At least one unfinished pillar remains in its quarry position, too large to move with. Available equipment, abandoned when its dimensions exceeded what the builders could transport. The T-shape is not an accident. It is a consistent architectural choice repeated across multiple enclosures built over more than 1,000 years. The crossbar of the T represents a head, the vertical element a body. The pillars are abstract anthropomorphic figures, beings rather than simply columns. Several have carved arms along their sides, hands in low relief, and belt details around their midsections. They are not portraits, but they clearly represent humanoid forms standing upright in an enclosed space. The precision of construction is documented in detail in excavation reports from the German Archaeological Institute. Enclosure floors are levelled bedrock, smoothed to create a flat surface. Pillar sockets are cut to consistent dimensions matching the pillars they receive. The enclosure walls are built to consistent height and thickness. This reflects a design planned before construction began and executed with standardized measurement and coordination among workers operating simultaneously on different parts of the structure. Flint tools used to shape the pillars have been recovered in large numbers from excavation contexts. Experimental archaeology has confirmed the shaping work is achievable with flint implements, though it requires skill and significant time. The limiting factor in building Göbekli Tepe was not tool capability. It was the organizational capacity to bring together enough coordinated labor, sustain it through construction periods, and direct it toward a shared architectural goal across generations. The carved reliefs covering Göbekli Tepe's pillars represent the largest corpus of pre-pottery Neolithic animal art yet discovered. Species depicted include foxes, boars, wild cattle, cranes, vultures, scorpions, spiders, snakes, and lions. The carvings range from shallow incised lines to fully three-dimensional relief sculpture, with animal forms projecting significantly from the stone surface. Some are small and sketchy, others are large and anatomically accurate enough for confident species identification. Foxes appear more frequently than any other species across the site. Vultures occupy prominent positions on several pillars, depicted in ways suggesting symbolic rather than purely naturalistic intent. Researchers including Martin Sweatman and Dimitrios Sikritsis published analysis in 2017 in Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry proposing that specific pillar carvings correspond to constellation positions and may encode a calendar system. Specific animal species associated with specific times of year for a mobile population tracking seasons without writing. This interpretation remains debated, but has attracted serious scholarly attention. The most discussed single image at the site appears on what researchers call the vulture stone in enclosure D. It shows a large vulture with raised wing over what appears to be a headless human figure, above a row of smaller birds with a scorpion below. The scene has been interpreted as representing death and the afterlife, recording a specific astronomical event, or encoding a cosmological narrative. No interpretation has achieved consensus, which reflects the fundamental challenge of reading symbolic imagery from a culture that left no written records and whose belief system must be reconstructed entirely from physical evidence. The labour mathematics of building even a single Göbekli Tepe enclosure require a coordinated workforce of several hundred people working over an extended period. Moving a 10-ton limestone pillar from quarry to construction site, erecting it and setting it in a prepared socket requires rope, wooden levers, earthen ramps and enough people to apply coordinated force simultaneously, a minimum of several dozen workers for the moving operation alone, many more for quarrying, shaping and support. Feeding that workforce is illuminated by the site's faunal remains. Excavations have recovered enormous quantities of animal bones, primarily gazelle, wild cattle, and other large game, representing thousands of individual animals processed at the site over its period of use. The bones show butchery, marks consistent with large-scale food preparation rather than typical subsistence hunting patterns. The scale of feasting implied points to periodic large gatherings from across a wide region, people coming together for construction work and communal ritual rather than permanent co-residence. This interpretation, Göbekli Tepe as a regional gathering place rather than a permanent settlement, is supported by the near-total absence of domestic debris. No hearths for daily cooking, no storage pits, no dense deposits of everyday waste. What exists instead is feast preparation debris, stone tool production waste, and architectural remains. The builders did not live there. They came to it, worked on it, gathered around it, and left. The organisational implication is the most striking aspect of the site. Bringing together hundreds of people from different bands, feeding them during a construction season, and directing their labour toward a shared architectural project requires leadership, planning, and a shared symbolic framework that makes the project meaningful across participating groups. All of this was happening among people without agriculture, without pottery, and without permanent settlements. The complexity was social and cognitive before it was material. Göbekli Tepe was not abandoned to slow decay. The enclosures were deliberately buried, filled with carefully deposited limestone rubble, flint artifacts, and animal bones that covered the pillars and walls to a depth that preserved them intact. The fill material is not random debris. Its composition and deposition pattern indicate intentional, organised effort. Someone chose to seal these structures, and did so carefully enough that 12,000 years later, archaeologists found enclosures in a state of preservation, allowing detailed architectural analysis. Why a community would invest significant labour in burying its own monuments has multiple possible answers, none confirmable from current evidence. The most conservative interpretation is ritual decommissioning, a structured closure of a sacred space at the end of its active use, performed in a way that preserved its integrity for future use, or simply as a final act of respect for a place considered powerful. Schmidt himself proposed that the burial was protective, that the builders understood, possibly from experience with other structures, that buried stone outlasts exposed stone and deliberately preserved their work for future they could not specifically anticipate. If so, it represents intentional archival thinking, a decision to leave something for people not yet born. That is striking to encounter in a pre-agricultural context. The practical consequence, whatever the motivation, is extraordinary preservation. The fill protected carved pillar surfaces from weathering. The sealed environment prevented biological and chemical degradation. When Schmidt's team excavated the fill layers, they found stone surfaces, tool assemblages, and faunal remains in a state that open-air sites of the same period simply cannot achieve. The absence of domestic evidence at Göbekli Tepe clarifies one thing and complicates another. It was clearly not a settlement. The question is, what kind of non-domestic purpose could motivate sustained construction effort over more than 1,000 years? The religious sanctuary interpretation dominates the peer-reviewed literature. The scale of the faunal assemblage, consistent with large communal feasts documented in anthropological literature as associated with ritual, gatherings across many cultures, and the symbolic character of the carved imagery both support it. The enclosures, with their anthropomorphic central pillars surrounded by walls decorated with animal reliefs, resemble sacred spaces in later Near Eastern religious traditions where inner sanctuaries housed representations of divine beings. The astronomical alignment argument has attracted sustained scholarly attention. Several enclosures show orientations corresponding to specific astronomical phenomena: solstice sunrise positions, the rising of significant stars in the sky as visible from this location around 10,000 years ago. Whether these alignments are deliberate or within the range of coincidence expected when multiple structures are built over centuries at the same location is debated. The discussion continues without resolution. What is not debated is that Göbekli Tepe was a centre of regional significance, drawing people from across a wide area over an extended period. The consistent investment in its construction across multiple enclosure phases, each following similar architectural principles while varying in detail, implies a transmitted tradition, a set of practices and beliefs maintained across generations that gave the site its meaning and justified the labour of building and rebuilding it. That tradition left no written record. Its content must be inferred from the physical evidence, which is rich in detail but resistant to definitive interpretation. Göbekli Tepe was built at a moment of significant environmental transition. The period around 9600 BC marks the end of the Younger Dryas, a rapid cooling event that had interrupted post-glacial warming and pushed temperatures back toward glacial conditions for approximately 1,200 years. When the Younger Dryas ended, it ended abruptly. Greenland ice core data indicates temperatures in the North Atlantic rose by approximately 10 degrees Celsius within a decade. One of the fastest climate transitions in the geological record of the past 100,000 years. For human populations in the Near East, this represented both opportunity and disruption. The cooler, drier Younger Dryas conditions had concentrated human populations in areas with reliable water sources, pushing mobile hunter-gatherer bands into closer contact. The rapid warming changed resource distribution across the landscape, requiring adaptation at a pace that existing social systems were not necessarily prepared for. Göbekli Tepe's construction begins precisely at this moment of transition. Schmidt suggested the site may have functioned as a social technology for managing stress during a period when multiple groups were being forced together by environmental change. A shared sacred space whose construction and maintenance created obligations of cooperation among otherwise competing bands. The feasting evidence is consistent with this. Large communal meals are a documented mechanism for building social alliances and reducing conflict in small-scale societies under environmental pressure. The same region where Göbekli Tepe is located is also where the earliest evidence of agricultural domestication appears in the archaeological record, beginning roughly 1,000 years after the site's construction. Whether the social complexity demonstrated at Göbekli Tepe contributed to conditions that made agriculture possible by creating concentrated semi-permanent gatherings in which intensive plant management could develop is a hypothesis being actively researched. Radiocarbon dating of organic material from secure stratigraphic contexts has built a detailed chronological framework for the site. The earliest enclosures date to approximately 9600 to 9000 BC. Later enclosures extend the construction history to approximately 8000 BC. More than 1,000 years of building during which the architectural tradition remained recognizable while specific details changed. The later enclosures tend to have smaller pillars than the earlier ones. A pattern some researchers interpret as declining investment connected to the social transformations of the agricultural transition. LiDAR, airborne laser scanning that maps surface topography at high resolution, has revealed that the excavated enclosures represent a small fraction of the site's total extent. Ground-penetrating radar and magnetic susceptibility measurements have identified additional buried enclosure structures across approximately 9 hectares, the vast majority unexcavated. Current estimates suggest fewer than 5% of the site has been opened by excavation. Most of what Göbekli Tepe contains remains undisturbed. This has significant implications. The unexcavated portions are preserved under the same carefully deposited fill that protected the known enclosures, available to researchers with future analytical tools. The German Archaeological Institute's decision to proceed slowly and leave large portions unexcavated reflects a philosophy of archaeological stewardship, preserving the possibility of future discovery rather than extracting all available information immediately with current methods. The analytical techniques applied to material already excavated have expanded considerably since the 199 zeros. Isotopic analysis of faunal remains has refined understanding of the seasons when feasting occurred and the geographic origins of the animals consumed. Residue analysis of stone surfaces has begun to reveal traces of organic materials used in construction or ritual contexts that are not visible through standard excavation methods. Göbekli Tepe's extraordinary age and evident sophistication has attracted interpretations ranging from careful peer-reviewed scholarship to claims that the mainstream archaeological establishment will not engage with. Distinguishing between them requires clarity about what the evidence actually supports. What is solidly established? Göbekli Tepe is approximately 12,000 years old, built by pre-agricultural people, contains monumental architecture of genuine complexity, was deliberately buried by its builders, and represents the earliest known large-scale organised construction by several thousand years. These facts are not contested and are supported by extensive, independently replicated evidence. What is actively debated among serious researchers? The specific function of the site, the meaning of the carved imagery, the astronomical significance of the enclosure orientations, the relationship between the site and the origins of agriculture, and the degree to which the social organisation demonstrated implies forms of hierarchy and institutional complexity that the standard model of hunter-gatherer society does not accommodate. What the current evidence does not support. Claims that Göbekli Tepe proves a technologically advanced lost civilization, encodes specific records of catastrophic cosmic events, or demonstrates contact with non-human intelligences. These interpretations typically require ignoring the dating evidence, misreading the archaeological context, or treating speculative pattern matching as confirmed fact. The real story. Hunter-gatherers building monumental religious architecture 12,000 years ago and then carefully burying it is already one of the most surprising discoveries in the history of archaeology. It does not need embellishment to be remarkable. The deepest implication of Göbekli Tepe is not about what ancient people could build. It is about what motivated them to build it. The site required collective labour sustained over generations without the economic or political structures modern thinking associates with large-scale organised effort. No state compelled the work, no agricultural surplus funded it, no writing system coordinated it. What organised the labour was something prior to all of those things, a shared sense of purpose, powerful enough to bring hundreds of people together repeatedly across centuries to quarry and erect and carve and feast and bury massive stone structures on a hilltop in southeastern Turkey. That shared purpose almost certainly had a religious or cosmological character. The carved imagery, the anthropomorphic pillars, the scale of communal feasting, and the careful ritual burial all point toward a belief system that gave the site its meaning and sustained the community's investment across time. The specific content of that belief system is inaccessible, but its functional reality, its capacity to organise human effort at a scale the standard model did not predict, is documented in stone. The revision Göbekli Tepe demands of the standard account of human prehistory is not minor. The sequence most textbooks still present, agriculture, then settlement, then social complexity, then monumental construction, is at minimum incomplete. Göbekli Tepe demonstrates that symbolic and social complexity, sufficient to motivate monumental construction, was possible before agriculture. Whether this means that symbolic and religious life drove the origins of agriculture, rather than following from it, as Schmidt proposed, remains an open and genuinely important question. The builders of Göbekli Tepe had none of the material markers of civilization as conventionally defined. What they had was each other, the animals and landscape they knew intimately, and whatever it was they believed the carved stones on that hilltop meant. That was enough to move mountains. Literally.